just and compassionate community within and beyond our walls. My name is Lexi Lott, and I serve as a worship associate for this congregation. If you are a newcomer, please visit our welcome table in the fellowship hall, where you can find more information about our congregation and can sign up to receive the Beat, our weekly email newsletter. Also, if you'd like to be greeted as a newcomer after the service, please take a red mug, and members will seek you out to make sure you are warmly welcome. A gentle reminder to everyone, if you have cell phones or other electronic devices with you, please silence them now so our time together will not be disrupted by buzzing or ringing. If you have a restless infant or toddler with you today and need a place to take a break outside the sanctuary, we have an infant care room in the back corner you can access from the hallway, where you can still see and hear the service. Our opening words were written by Jay Ward. Are we a people of holding on or letting go? Holding on to rigid ideas, or letting go and opening our minds and our hearts to something new? Holding on to certainty of how things should be, or letting go and living with the uncertainty of new ways of being in the world? Holding on to what makes us comfortable, or letting go so we may grow, which can be uncomfortable? Holding on to what makes us safe, or letting go to make room to help others feel safe? In this new year, may we burn the ties that hold us back from being our true selves and reaching our true potential. May the flame we kindle be a symbol of lighting a new way, and may it be a symbol of letting go, because holding on too long and too tightly is never good for the soul. Please join me in saying the words for lighting our chalice. In the bleak and cold winter, we gather ourselves in to light the fire to warm our spirits, to kindle the flame of love and hope.
Please rise and body your spirit for opening and gather the spirit.
Please be seated. Good morning. My sermon later in the service will focus on messages from the Disney movie Frozen. If you have children between the ages of, say, 2 and 18, you are very likely extremely familiar with the movie and have probably watched it and heard the soundtrack not just a few times, but dozens, if not hundreds of times. If you do not have young children, you may have somehow escaped Frozen mania and have no idea what the big deal is. I'll provide a synopsis of the movie later on, but for now, suffice it to say that Frozen, along with its sequel, Frozen 2, which was just released about 6 weeks ago, is not just a favorite of many children, but something like an obsession. A recent New York Times article included interviews with parents and children talking about Frozen and what it means to them. Stephanie O'Hara, mother of Smith O'Hara, age 4, said, "Just the other day I walked into Smith's room and he was in his underwear with a blanket wrapped around him, twirling and belting 'Let It Go' in front of the mirror. I have heard that song so many times," she said, "my ears bleed. I never tell him though." Peter Ryder said, "Our 2-year-old said, 'Hey Google,' before she said any of our names. So now she's always yelling at the machine, 'Hey Google, play Let It Go.'" Zoe Toby, age 9, describing one of the film's main characters, said, "Anna's power is caring for everybody. She cares about Olaf. She can make things and have fun, and everybody can do that, besides our president." Heather Holliday said of her son Boston, "One Christmas in Florida, Boston learned that it wasn't cold enough to build a snowman. He suggested singing the song, 'Do You Want to Build a Snowman?' from the movie together instead. During the part of the song that talks about playing together, he said, 'But we'll always be friends. I'll always want to play with you, Mommy.'" It would be easy to dismiss the Frozen films as merely more evidence of the insidious Disney marketing machine as the evil empire. And there's certainly some truth to that thought. However, any time a film or song is as big as Frozen and its hit song Let It Go have been, it is worth examining why they are so immensely popular. So rather than being dismissive of the film, I ask you to consider it anew today, and in the words of Elsa, let it go. Speaking of which, in place of our children's story today, we are going to sing Let It Go as a sing-along. Any children who would like to come forward, or others, to help lead the singing, please come forward now. After which the children will go to their RE classes.
Concealed
seats, I'd ask anyone who has an empty seat next to them to raise their hands. And as the children filter out, others can filter in.
To members of Sunnyhill going through difficult life events, whatever they may be, offering a compassionate listening ear and loving presence. If you want to get in touch with us, you may contact us directly or call the church office or send an email to pastoralcare@sunnyhill.org. Each week at this time in the service, we share joys and sorrows submitted by members of the congregation. We share the things that we are celebrating as well as the things we are mourning, so that they do not need to be held alone. Joys and sorrows may be submitted online from our website or handwritten and submitted at the welcome table in Fellowship Hall. After each joy and sorrow that I read, please respond by saying, "We hold you in our hearts." I have just one joy today from Elizabeth Scanlon. I had surgery on my right thumb for arthritis on December 31st. I am doing well and on no pain meds. I am off work for 3 months of recovery. Send healing thoughts as I learn to do everything with my left hand. To Elizabeth, we hold you in our hearts. Let us take a moment of silence to bear in mind this joy as well as any joys and sorrows that are held too closely to be shared. All that we have carried through the seasons of our lives has brought us here to this place made sacred by our coming together. May we hold all that we carry in the warm embrace of this loving community.
I'm lighting an additional candle this morning as a prayer for peace. In the wake of the American killing of an Iranian military leader in Iraq, the world is now less safe than it was a few days ago, and the entire world is bracing itself for a possible war between the United States and Iran, a war that cannot be won in any conventional sense of the word, and that would probably claim hundreds of thousands of lives and cost billions, if not trillions, of dollars while destabilizing an already volatile situation in the Middle East. I pray that the march to war will be stopped and that compassion and peace might radiate outward from this place to all the world. Please join me in the spirit of meditation with prayer. It is difficult to open our inmost selves to one another in a world filled with fear, with distrust, with suspicion. It is difficult to allow ourselves to be vulnerable when there is so much to guard against, so much violence, so much hatred, so much danger. It is difficult to let ourselves fully experience our emotions at a time when there is so much we'd rather not feel. Such intense and persistent dread, disgust, and dismay. Yet we yearn to open our hearts, our souls, our very being to the love we need, the caring and compassion we crave. Let us pause for a moment of silence as we hold together our fears and apprehensions alongside our hopes and longings. May fear burn away like the morning mist. May our souls unfurl their wings and take flight. May the exquisite rose of love at the heart of this community open so widely that it engulfs and embraces all our fears and failures, all our hopes and heartaches with the warm breath of compassion and the restorative heartbeat of justice. Amen. As I mentioned earlier, those among us with young children are almost undoubtedly intimately familiar with the animated Disney film Frozen, whether we want to be or not. My own daughter was 9 years old when the original movie was released, and it became an instant favorite in our household. Over the course of several years, I heard and saw parts of the film perhaps 50 times or so. But it wasn't until a few weeks ago that I sat down and watched the whole film from start to finish in preparation for my now 15-year-old daughter's trip to the theater to watch the sequel, Frozen 2, which she's now seen 3 times, by the way. Media critic Adam Sternberg, father of a 6-year-old child, recently published a column entitled, Achieving Transcendence on the Millionth Viewing of Frozen, in which he writes, "It's hard for me to say now exactly how many times I've watched Frozen from beginning to end. 10, 12, 20? But I can say with confidence that I've watched it more times than any other film in my life. I've watched it more than I've watched Citizen Kane. I've watched it more than I've watched all the Godfather films combined. I've definitely listened to the Frozen soundtrack well over 100 times, based on rather conservative estimate of at least once a week for 52 weeks over 3 years. I could sing the entire soundtrack to you right now from memory." Sternberg continues, "I live with someone, a tiny someone, who wants to watch and listen to Frozen again and again and again. If familiarity breeds contempt, I should hate Frozen. A lot. So why am I so excited to take my tiny someone to see Frozen 2? Here's one thing I've learned from watching Frozen repeatedly. Frozen is good, very good. Once I took my prejudicial aversion to it, and yes, let it go, I realized that beyond the lunchboxes and branded backpacks and Anna and Elsa matching sock sets, the movie itself is an expertly and even ingeniously crafted tale, a nuanced examination of sisterly devotion that features some of the best voice talent in the world." Sternberg goes on, "The other thing I've learned from Frozen is this. There is value in watching something over and over. One psychological theory contends that repeating a pleasurable experience is more likely to make you feel happy overall than a restless search for constant novelty, which seems counterintuitive, particularly in a capitalist culture in which a ceaseless churn of newness is an economic imperative, whether it's trading in for a new car every few years or subscribing to a streaming service for a catalog of content you'd need several lifetimes to sit through. The ability to repeatedly engage with the work of art to the point where you not only experience the initial emotional impact, but start to comprehend the framework of craftsmanship beneath it is the essence of cultural appreciation. And frankly, it's a thrilling experience, no matter what work of art you're engaging with. So, what's it all about? What is the story of this film? And why is it important, if it is important? Perhaps the most concise synopsis I've read of the plot of Frozen was written by blogger J.W. Wartick, who describes it as follows. Frozen is a story about two princesses, Elsa and Anna. They were best friends as little children, until Elsa's magical powers get out of control and she accidentally harms her sister. In response, her parents hide Elsa away from the kingdom, the staff, and away from her little sister. Anna, not knowing why she and Elsa can't play together anymore, feels alone and abandoned. As each wrestles with issues of identity and love, the story unfolds. In the end, it is the love between the two sisters that becomes the focal point. The romantic love interests play a role, but they are largely contrasted with the true love story, the love the two sisters have for each other. Anna ends up freeing herself, the whole kingdom, and her insecure older sibling with an act of sacrificial love. It's a powerful message in tone and presentation. There are three themes in Frozen that I'd like to explore briefly today to examine the theological underpinnings of the film and the wisdom that it has to offer us. The first is female empowerment and self-determination. The second is isolated individualism versus belonging and community. And the third is sacrificial and unconditional love. Historically, animated children's films have had a big problem when it comes to their portrayal of female characters, especially films featuring princesses, who are often shown as passive victims whose main function is to wait to be rescued by a man. Unitarian Universalism's second principle promotes justice, equity, and compassion in human relations, and feminism has been one expression of this principle. But we have struggled as a denomination with undoing centuries of systemic sexism. It's only in the past decade that the number of male and female identified UU clergy has approached equilibrium. And it was just 2 years ago that we elected the first female president of the UUA. In any case, I think it's fair to say that one of our bedrock values as UUs is equity and empowerment for women. When my daughter was younger and I read fairy tales to her, I was honestly appalled by some of the very same books that I read as a child, because they were so clearly sexist and disempowering for women and girls. And many of the older animated versions of these stories were the same way, featuring extremely unenlightened stereotypes of female characters. In more recent years, however, Disney princesses have changed and gradually become stronger, more empowered, more self-motivated and self-determined, and honestly, more likable as a result. In Frozen, we find not just one, but two interesting, independent, and powerful female leads. Although both have their flaws and challenges, both Elsa and Anna reflect changing norms in the portrayal of Disney princesses. What starts out as a conventional-seeming Disney romance between Anna and Hans takes an abrupt 180-degree turn and becomes a lesson about betrayal and the duplicity and cruelty of men, with Anna persevering and eventually triumphing over the forces of oppression. As for Elsa, she is the victim mostly of her own struggle to come to terms with her powers, as well as being perhaps the victim of her parents' rather inhumane lack of imagination in dealing with Elsa and her powers by keeping her locked away. But years after her parents' deaths, and the parents always seem to die in these Disney films, when Elsa breaks free and throws caution to the wind, there is such absolute joy and immense power in her actions and her attitude. It's at this point in the story that Let It Go appears as a celebration of unfettered self-determination and the magic of self-abandon. But for Elsa, the choice seems to be either living a lie and pretending that she has no magical powers, or going wild with her magical powers, but living in complete isolation from others, even those she loves, for fear of harming them. Shocked and frightened by her own powers, Elsa makes the choice to live entirely alone. Which brings me to the second point I'd like to emphasize, which is that tension between isolated individualism and belonging in community. Our first UU principle, the inherent worth and dignity of every person, puts a decided emphasis on the individual rather than the collective. And one of our most cherished values has been freedom of thought and expression. However, it is important for us to reflect on the ways in which this emphasis on the individual can become unhealthy and harmful. None of us exists in a vacuum. And my independence of thought and expression is nowhere near as important as the relationships which nurture and define me. It's great to think and do what I want, but what makes me human and what makes me authentically me are my relationships with others. The lesson is one that Elsa has to learn over the course of the story. Convinced that the powers she possesses can only harm others, she chooses isolated individualism, living far away from her home in an exquisite crystal castle of her own creation, rebuffing her sister's attempts to bring her back into the beloved community. Elsa says, "Yes, I'm alone, but I'm alone and free." Part of the dynamic of our own era is one of isolated individualism versus beloved community. Even though we're more connected, at least electronically, than ever before, we tend to build islands of splendid isolation with the appearance of well-being, but with an underlying reality of feeling very much alone. Our fear drives us further and further apart from one another and further away from the life-giving love that we need to experience in order to be our best and truest selves. And bringing me to my third point, one important aspect of this life-giving love is that it is unconditional and at times sacrificial in nature. Some theologians see in Frozen a Christian allegory. In the end, it is Anna's willingness to sacrifice her own life to save her sister that results in both sisters being saved and the entire kingdom being rescued from the evil clutches of Hans. In a superb twist on the usual plot line, the act of true love that leads to a happy ending has almost nothing to do with romance and everything to do with sisterly affection and compassion. It's a perfect example of agape love, or love for everyone. Agape has always had the connotation of selfless love. It is the love of the Christian Gospels. But it also appears in other religious traditions. For example, metta, or universal loving kindness, in the Buddhist tradition. Agape is a kind of love that is perhaps in the steepest decline in our world. If we are to have any hope of overcoming fear and hate, we need to relearn agape love and increase our capacity for empathy and caring about both friends and strangers. In the face of all the hatred we see in the world, it may seem naive or irrelevant to talk about love. But our faith as Unitarian Universalists is premised on the idea that only love can conquer hate. As Martin Luther King said, returning hate for hate multiplies hate, adding deeper darkness to a night already devoid of stars. Darkness cannot drive out darkness, only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate, only love can do that. Now, the kind of love that King was talking about is not the love that is extolled and worshipped in much of pop culture. It is not the gooey, saccharine emotion that we as a culture have fetishized with films and reality TV shows that put romantic love above all else. The kind of love that King was talking about was more complex and much more powerful than the kind of love that we usually think about and obsess over. It is at least a little surprising that such a great example of this kind of love can be found at the heart of a children's animated Disney movie. But it's also heartening to know that even if many of the churches in our country are not embracing this kind of love, our children are still getting this important message somewhere. In a world that seems to be moving backward in many ways, at a time when misogyny and hyper-individualism and fear-based hatred seem to be on the rise, it is so encouraging to see a film that embraces the healthier and more sustainable values of gender equity, the creation of compassionate community, and the bedrock importance of life-giving, life-sustaining, life-affirming love. I hope and pray that we will hear and heed this call to love wherever we may find it, and that we will respond with true courage, deep compassion, and abiding connection with one another and with that which is larger than ourselves alone. May it be so. Amen. Please rise in body and or spirit and join in singing. Come sing a song. Offering to support the work of this congregation.
All right, Krista. Don't worry about being Hans. You've got opinions on my life and my relations, but let me tell you what.
Okay, enlighten me.
Love is the one thing that has zero complications, and I can trust my gut.
Okay, you frighten me.
Some people know their hearts the minute true love starts.
Some people read a lot of books.
I like books. Some people simply know when true love says hello.
the rain would have worn some winter gear.
Anyone with half a life would have one friend who's not a deer.
I do! Any fool who runs along is gonna bang their head.
Any fool who doesn't jump right now is probably gonna end up dead.
Wow!
Like I said, I'd like to point out that we've come a good long way here, and that, wow, you're really strong.
I lift a lot of ice.
You
You saved my life just now. I guess I gotta say here. My first impression was wrong.
and see, you're nice.
That jump was really brave.
Your catch was quite a save.
You've got some guts.
You've got some brains.
Thanks.
With miles and miles to go, I guess it's nice to know that I can trust you. Though the question still remains, what do you know about love?
Just be careful.
What do you know about love? A little fade.
At least we know one thing. This trip should be interesting.
What do you know about love? What do you know about
Please join me in saying the words for extinguishing our chalice. We extinguish the flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
May you know fully and deeply the blessings of each of your heart's seasons. The inward turning of winter, springtime's lush renewal, the effortless, steady growth of summer, and autumn's rich harvest. May your passage from season to season be blessed, eased by hands to hold, and by the light of love to guide you on.